Yes. You guys ready? Ready? Meeting come to order. We'll have a pledge.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Upper Chichester Township Board of Commissioners Caucus meeting, August 4th, 2022. George, can you do roll call, please?
Sure. Commissioner Bacco,
Here.
Commissioner Godioso,
Here.
Commissioner Rakowski,
Here.
Commissioner Neary, Commissioner Whitaker, Lisa Catania, Michael Pierce, and myself, George Needles, present.
Thank you. Before we open up for citizens' comments for tonight, we have a presentation on the land development application of 4800 Chichester Avenue, the Alliance Group. I think majority of the people here tonight are going to be having comments, and we'll open it up on the phones. Once their presentation's done, we'll open it up on the telephone first, and then we'll go to the audience here tonight.
Good evening. Rob Lewis. I'm from Kaplan Stewart. I represent Alliance 4800 Chichester LLC, the owner of 4800 Chichester Avenue. Before the commissioners tonight is Alliance's application for land development approval for that property. And the property itself is a triangularly shaped property, as you can see on the screen. And I think I can scroll through. Yeah. Yes. Excellent. So triangular shaped piece of property, located obviously along Chichester Avenue, also having significant frontage on Route 322. And then the side of the property abuts residential properties that take access from Summers Lane. The property is zoned IC industrial and consists of about 9.6 acres in total. As you probably know, most people would just by driving by, the property has very significant topography. It ranges from a high point up here in this very northern corner of the site to a low point down here at the southwestern corner. And that drop actually towards 322 is a little bit more than 60 feet total. So there's very significant topography there. The property, as most people know, is presently improved with a farmhouse that's listed on the Chichester Historic Inventory, along with an associated barn and several other outbuildings, most recently occupied and used as a goat farm. Alliance proposes to develop the property for a 105,000 square foot warehouse building. Small portion of that building would obviously be dedicated to office to serve that warehouse facility. And that warehouse, along with office use, is a permitted use in the IC district. Access to the property, maybe I should zoom us in here a little bit. Access to the property would be from Chichester Avenue. And it's proposed to be at a single access point that would then form the fourth leg of the intersection with Chelsea Parkway and Chichester Avenue. Because Chichester Avenue is a state highway, an application to PennDOT has been submitted and an HOP will be required to construct that access. But that access really it becomes a fixed point because of Chelsea Parkway, and really the entirety of the layout of the facility had to start with the concept of that access point. This application has been in front of your planning commission several times. In the intervening periods between some of those meetings with the planning commission, we did have the opportunity to meet with the Historic Society, as well as with some of you through construction committee, to attempt to vet out some of the issues with the project and hopefully try and address some of those comments and concerns. Last week, we were in front of the Planning Commission and the Planning Commission did recommend approval, subject to certain conditions that they enumerated in their motion. In brief, the plan, as you see it, I believe meets or exceeds all the applicable ordinance requirements. Our project proposes, and I'll just run through a couple of these, not all of them. Project is proposing a building coverage of 25.5%. 40% is permitted, so significantly less than permitted by ordinance. Impervious coverage, 56.5% or 70% is permitted. Parking, we're actually providing the ordinance requirement. That was a discussion at one point because there was likely significantly more parking than any of our tenants would require. But we obviously need to meet the ordinance. We are providing parking for the warehouse itself. And now also, as I'll touch base on the residence actually has parking demands, and we've provided parking adjacent to it. There's total 173 parking spaces, I believe, on site, which will almost assuredly exceed what we actually need, but it's what your ordinance requires. The proposal is for a single-story warehouse building with a height of 40 feet. Again, that height is significantly less than permitted by your ordinance. Your ordinance permits a building height of 50 feet. We've agreed on this plan to reduce that height to 40 feet. The project proposes extensive landscaping. It's grading. In a second, I'll get there. No, 17. Thank you, Scott. Almost there. Can't read which sheet I'm on, so I'm gonna go by feel. Here we go. All right. So the project does propose, as you can see, very extensive landscaping buffers along our road frontages, but obviously most importantly, between us and our abutting neighbors. Significant landscaping that was commented on by your consultants. In fact, they actually asked us to move some of the landscaping because some of it likely will be so large when it's all said and done. But again, compliance with the ordinance being important and trying to buffer the project as much as we can from the various view sheds. We also submitted a lighting plan that demonstrates compliance with all applicable ordinance requirements, most notably no light spillover onto adjacent properties. As you might imagine, and I think probably have heard, there were some lively discussions over the last several months about this project. And so maybe if commissioners would allow me, I'll just try and touch base on a couple kind of those hot button items that I'm sure you'll have some questions on. Maybe I can try and discuss them a little bit, and then we'll answer your questions. So the first hot button item I touched on very quickly, and I'm going to try and come back to the site plan. 4, Scott, is that what it? Yeah. Okay. Stay a little zoomed in. I think that helps. So the first hot button topic was our proposal for that existing residence on the property, which obviously, as I mentioned, is listed in the historic register for the High Chichester area. Initially, we had proposed to remove that structure. The structure itself actually sits right where that access point comes into the site. So moving it was assured. Originally, as I mentioned, we had proposed to demolish it. But after significant interaction with the Historic Society, we have agreed to retain it and simply relocate it on site. I think you'll hear from Frank and or Cindy this evening. I think it went a long way, I hope, retaining that residence. It is not perfect where it is, other than we are showing that it is feasible to locate it there. As I mentioned to Cindy again earlier this evening, we are certainly looking to continue to work with the Historic Society and our Planning Commission just to decide on the best orientation for that residence, which way it should face. Because once you pick it up to move it, you can spin it around any direction you want. And and put it there and have it face any direction, but we can create the pad in that location and give it a prominent spot. As I mentioned, we've added some parking. We make sure the parking is immediately adjacent and there will be accessibility from that parking lot to that residence. Our hope is that eventually we will be able to obtain some sort of commercial use of that space. We're not sure what that looks like yet, whether it's office space or some sort of meeting space. For now, our commitment is to weatherproof that facility when we move it so that it does not further degrade. It's not in good condition today, but to ensure that demolition by neglect does not occur. We will weatherproof it. And then as we are in further discussions and hopefully obtain a viable tenant, invest further in the building, the rehab of that building to allow for that occupancy. Those commitments were memorialized in a letter dated June 20th that I sent to the Historic Society and CC'd to the township officials. The next item had to do with that access point that I discussed very briefly earlier. Our traffic study that was submitted with this project indicated that based upon projected traffic from our site, that additional improvements to the intersection were pretty minor. A little bit of minor restriping to the existing cross section that needed to be done. We obviously had to accommodate turns into our site. But during review of this project, we were asked to take a further look at that intersection and see if there were additional improvements that we might be able to make to the intersection that might assist in traffic flow. And specifically, we were asked to take a look at the geometry of this intersection and see if we could create a dedicated through lane off of Chelsea Parkway to our site, just trying to avoid any conflicts in those movements between truck traffic that might be coming in and vehicular traffic. For example, I think it originally was a through left. And so if a truck was there, cars were going to have to stack up behind the truck. And it was envisioned as a smoother circulation pattern through that intersection to find that additional lane. We did more research on the available right-of-way and what exists out there today and determined that we could provide that. So we have changed that intersection to provide some different lane striping than was recommended by the original traffic study. That included taking a look at this curb radii here to make sure that any vehicle that can actually fit under the bridge can actually still make this turn. We believe that largest vehicle, I think, is except the bus. There is a limitation on larger vehicles that can't fit under that underpass. But we changed that geometry. That required us to shift this access point ever so slightly to continue our alignment. But that actually worked well with one of the other discussion items that I'll talk about. But again, this intersection ultimately is subject to PennDOT jurisdiction. PennDOT's initial reactions so far have been positive, approving the scope of our traffic study, and I believe an initial approval of that study, but we have a ways to go for an HOP. Moving to that other item that kind of next to the intersection, we were asked also a few times to kind of relook at overall circulation on the plan. The circulation patterns on this site have changed a few times actually from the initial setup. And really the focus was 2 points. One, avoiding any internal conflicts here at this intersection, but also trying to do what we could to avoid use of this drive aisle. Few things have happened that you wouldn't know if you hadn't seen prior iterations, but all truck traffic that comes to the site will be required to stay on the southern side of this building, circulate to the loading docks in the rear, and then return out in that same direction. That allows us to avoid having any trucks circulate on that north and northwestern side of the building. There was discussion at one point of changing all of this parking to one way We didn't really like that design. And so, because that design would have then forced people to either violate that one-way restriction, or every single employee would have then driven around the building to circulate out, again, creating unnecessary traffic on that northern side. You'll recall, those that were there at the construction committee meeting, we actually wanted, if we could, to eliminate that drive aisle entirely. Unfortunately, we cannot. It's required as a fire apparatus access road, but our intention is to have it exclusively for that purpose, for emergency vehicles only. The desire is to make sure that none of the regular daily traffic utilizes that, due to its proximity, obviously, to our neighbors. In conjunction with all of that, we did move some parking around. Parking was shifted back off of Chichester Avenue a little bit to improve the ability to provide even more buffering along Chichester Avenue. We slid the parking away from the intersection to create some internal stacking areas to make sure that we didn't have any conflicts internally. But ultimately, I believe, resulted in a better design for the site. The next item, probably, I would say, all in all, the biggest issue of the whole project, or most talked about, is sound and noise. We received some comments from township consultants and obviously feedback from the Planning Commission after our first few meetings. And so we ended up having a sound study prepared and submitted. Very briefly, that sound study concludes that the operations of the anticipated tenants of this facility will comply with your ordinance standards. The study then went on to analyze the impacts of the site if on-site vehicular traffic, trucks and cars were factored into the noise ordinance. And I believe it also concludes that with the mitigation measure, which I will talk about in a moment, that we will, even with the vehicular traffic, comply with the daytime standards set forth in your ordinance. As I mentioned, one of the things that we did during this process was to come in and agree to add in an 8-foot tall sound mitigation fence along our property line here on the northwestern side. It's indicated by this line, based on a conversation with the neighbor that located in this home after our planning commission meeting. In all likelihood, this will come, down a little further, this line. This neighbor, this will likely come down a little bit further if topography permits, try and get it past their residence as much as we can. But the concept was to utilize our existing topography, and then also to utilize the buffering that we do have, this space to, in some places, build up a berm where we can, and then put that 8-foot tall wall fence along that entire property line to mitigate noise from the facility. It's important to note that there's about a 15-foot drop already before any berming and before that wall from this general point where the cursor is here in this northern corner down to the first floor elevation. So there's a pretty significant drop already. You can see the darker line here is actually a retaining wall. So the berming, the buffering, and that 8-foot sound mitigation fence will all sit on top of that topography. It will not 100% obscure the visual of the building, but obviously will significantly impact the visibility of that building. I am sure there will be more questions on noise and sound. I put our thoughts and our comments and our analysis of the ordinance into a letter that was also sent to the township earlier this week through your solicitor. I'm not sure if the board has read that or not, but I will leave that to you if you wish to discuss further. There was obviously disagreement on that last week. As I mentioned at the outset, It's our position that the plan, as you see it, meets or exceeds all of your ordinance requirements. And so we are here obviously asking that commissioners consider this plan, and next week at your business meeting, take action to grant preliminary land development approval for the project. I have our team with us tonight to answer any questions that the commissioners have.
You guys want to start first and then I'll go to the public?
When you refer to rehabbing the farmhouse, will you be rehabbing it eventually to the historical nature of the building? You're not going to change the nature of the building.
Correct. I mean, the being on the register, we're required to meet with your historic society for any exterior changes that we make to that structure. So that's certainly our intention, is to meet with them and to rehabilitate it to what it's supposed to look like. The interior likely will get some changes to make it usable. But we'll know more about that when we get closer to having tenancy. But certainly the exterior, the intention is to eventually restore it to the way it's supposed to look.
You just referred to it as just a preliminary submission. Your original was to ask for a preliminary final. Which are we doing here?
I believe that we've submitted only as preliminary. Technically, under your ordinance, I believe it's only preliminary submission.
I thought you asked for a variance.
We did not.
Good. Nicole, you have anything? Mike?
Like you are addressing our concerns. The one thing I'd like to discuss is the 8-foot high sound wall. You had noted on the drawing that you're showing tonight that it doesn't show the full extent of it, and you're most likely going to extend it down.
So our sound study was based on the location, that's shown on this plan. Our goal really is to take that 8-foot, I don't know what I did there. Jasmine, you got me covered. Really is to kind of meander that fence along that property line, because there's some existing vegetation that's going to remain, and have that stay there, and then bring it down pretty far down the property here. You can see the extent of our property line at the bottom. The goal was originally to do kind of a wing wall at the end to really help trap that sound a little bit at the corner. This neighbor attended the planning commission meeting. We had pretty lengthy discussion off the record, and they had asked if we would consider bringing it down further. And based on talking to my client, we don't have any objection to, if topography permits, we have no problems with bringing that further down.
Yeah. Since this is preliminary, we're going to see another plan come in for preliminary final. So at that point in time, I would like to see the full extent to make sure the residents of the township know exactly how long the wall is going to be. So that way, when we go to, if it goes for approval and it gets recorded, we have a record of exactly what.
That makes sense.
What's going in.
And we were asked also to provide a specification on the fencing itself as well.
Right,
So we'll provide that.
That's typically a sound, something like concrete barrier. Is it going to be that type of sound wall? When you say fence, I'm a little leery that that's going to actually hold out any noise. So when I hear fence, I think chain link fence.
Yeah, no.
Obviously, I
They-
think that's it. Could you clarify?
Sure. And I'll have Max step up in 1 second to provide some more detail, but sound attenuation, fencing and walls actually has dramatically improved. I've been doing them for various clients all over southeastern Pennsylvania, and they do have materials now that are more akin aesthetically to a fence that have sound attenuation to them. And that's the whole point. It's not just a fence you can go buy at Home Depot. They are substantially denser. The materials that they're using to create the necessary sound attenuation is not the same as a concrete wall that PennDOT may build at 25 feet tall, but we will provide the specification. I just had one, for example, in Abington Township in Montgomery County, 70-year-old shopping center sitting right up against residences, and all the deliveries happen in the back. They had an old stockade fence there. And when we were adding to that shopping center, they asked if we'd replace it. And we went out and found the specifications for a replacement fence that could go there. And it has pretty significant impacts over even a stockade fence in terms of its sound attenuation.
I just had just two more just two more comments. The sound study that you did, I heard you state that you're following our ordinances, but the sound study, I just want to make sure you took into consideration for different type of businesses that may come in, and that sound study would cover the sound study would cover any business that will be allowed to use that by right to make sure that they're adhering to the sound.
Yes,
criteria.
the tenants that we are marketing to and likely to have in this facility are tenants that will be operating within the physical structure, other than the actual loading activities. This is not a location where you're going to have operations external to the facility, or that you would even likely have, roll-up doors that are open, allowing internal operations to be heard outdoors. It's also important to note that despite the sound study, if a tenant were to come in that had an operation that was different than the assumption made in that sound study, they would have to obviously demonstrate still that they are going to comply. But our sound expert on doing the study utilized typical tenants for this facility in determining really what it really comes down to what the mechanical operations and the external noises would be from a facility like this. You have obviously large AC units, things of that nature that are going to generate more of the noise than anything else from this facility other than vehicular traffic.
I think another concern that came up through the planning commission was hours of operation. Is there any discussion about limiting the hours that trucks will be coming in?
Until we have a tenant identified, we cannot limit the hours of operation at this point.
Thank you.
You mind if I go?
Go ahead, you could finish because I'm gonna be a couple minutes.
Yeah. Okay. I'm referring to Mr. Fioravanti's letter of April 26th, where it references preliminary final land development and waiver 2. A waiver is requested from Saldo section, so it can be processed in 2. Now, if that's changed, that's fine. I'm sorry.
I didn't recognize the name, sorry. I was wondering if there was somebody on my team that I didn't
The
know.
plans that we had, the preliminary final plot, regardless, we can check that. On sheet 12, which I don't have the sheets anymore,
Okay.
but it would appear that there's a discharge flow that runs through 2 home sites, and I believe the township property as well. Is that correct?
Scott, just going to address that.
What's required there? Do we need easements or?
No, we had to, this got mapped for our MPDS permit application with Delaware County Conservation District. Trying to get it. You're referring to this? Our offsite discharge map. So we have, there's 2 existing culverts underneath the 322, where that cursor is there, and then down here. So we have our stormwater basins outlet to those same under the same culverts that go under 322. And in order to get our MPDS permit, they asked us to demonstrate that we're lowering the volume of flow and the rate of flow, which we are doing, and then show where that flow goes. So what is mapped is the existing flow that goes underneath those culverts. That's what is mapped on that map, is their existing pathway, and we are not changing that. The only thing we're changing is we're lowering the amount of stormwater that's being discharged to those culverts.
This is the last question. When you had the meeting last week with the planning commission, they listed 6 conditions. Have they reviewed? Has the owner reviewed them and have any response to them?
Sure. I think I have them all remembered in my head. We did not receive anything in writing documenting them.
Tell you what they are.
Would love at least, it would just help me to make sure I don't miss one.
Well, first one's consider a smaller building.
Yeah, and the gentleman on the planning commission that made that motion, his indication, I believe, to a question was, are you talking about a smaller footprint or a shorter building? And his response was a shorter building. As I indicated in my description of the project, we have reduced, the building height here is significantly below the ordinance requirement. That building height is necessary for this type of use. There is a minimum clear space that you must have in the warehouse facility. So 40 feet at this point is the lowest that we can go with that building.
Point two was subdued exterior lighting, but I believe you mentioned that the lighting will not bleed over to.
Correct. And I think there was a comment when he was making the motion, just making sure that all of our fixtures, no fixture is pointed towards any of our neighbors. That's going to be required by your ordinance that they be, fully shielded fixtures and the ones on the building face down so that you don't have light spreading out.
When the building's being constructed, is the sound barrier going to go up before, or are you going to have a temporary sound barrier to protect the residents?
We discussed this a little bit in the last week. We do believe that we can work on a construction sequencing to get that sound fencing in relatively early in the project. Exactly when, we don't know yet. It's a matter of figuring out just the sequencing of the site. So it will certainly not be one of those things that we wait until we're done construction and finally put the fence up. It is something that we believe we can get in earlier in the project. Exactly when, I can't tell you yet, but we're happy to go through that and figure out a way to make sure that it gets in at some reasonable time frame so that it actually has some utility during construction.
So we could, basically, it would be in the sequence of construction when we get the final plan.
Correct.
Point four was no truck traffic between 10 and 7, which has been discussed, but I also saw that in the notes, it seemed that you were at least willing to look at that issue once you had a tenant.
Certainly, once we have a tenant, we can, and I addressed that, I think, in my letter from earlier this week.
5 was improved building aesthetics, which I'm not really certain what that meant at the time.
Yeah, I mean, it is, it's an industrial building. And I know that Planning Commission didn't really see the first iterations. So you have to take my word for it, which I know people don't want to, but the design is substantially different, actually, the aesthetics, than what you might normally see. There's variations in color and variations in material to try and break up a facade of that magnitude. So we have obviously submitted those elevations. We were asked to submit one more elevation, which we will provide, that shows the residence and how that sits on the site. Again, we're hoping to work with the Planning Commission and the Historic Society to best locate that, and then we will submit that elevation as well.
And the last one, I think you actually already answered. It's a rendering of the historical building that we're just going to do it to the historical standards and work with the Historical Society. Thank you. Go ahead.
Max Ryan.
Yeah. Yeah, so we would hope to have one tenant. The building's designed that it might accommodate two. That's probably the most that we would have. I would say that most all of the occupants we have in buildings like this actually do generally just work during the daytime hours. They don't have overnight operations, but I don't have any details. We literally don't have a prospect for this user, but we would hold out for a very creditworthy, well-respected type business that would be signing a long-term lease, would run a very clean operation. Typically, this is the kind of space that they would be, as Rob said, functioning inside the building, not fabricating trusses in the parking lot, things like that, that would be restricted. So pretty clean operation, not generally a very noisy operation. They would be storing racking within the space and putting their goods on that racking, have a small bit of office. There might be a couple of a few thousand square feet of office space within the footprint of the warehouse, and the type of goods that they could be shipping or moving. We one of our tenants in a building comes to mind, Scrub Daddy. He chips and, makes the chips and sponges and stores them. They're a tenant of ours and they run a great operation. It's clean as a kitchen in the warehouse. That's not a prospect for here. They've moved from a site we bought in PA to New Jersey, into a building of ours, but any type of operator like that, I could see in this building.
Can I go first, Joe? Because I know you
Go
just for a second. I didn't, just a couple quick questions here. You answered the one about the tenant and you don't have a tenant yet, but I didn't hear anything about the barn. And what we're doing with any of that.
The barn will be raised, and as I laid out in our letter, prior to doing so, if any documentation wants to be done, usually before a structure like that's removed, somebody will document it. But also we've agreed to make all those materials from the barn available so that the barn can either be recreated off-site or those materials can be incorporated into other projects.
Okay. And the other question, once the house is moved, who's keeping the upkeep of the outside of it, the grounds of it, so it doesn't sit there for a year or two and we have nothing but weeds and everything growing everywhere?
Yeah, Alliance, as the owner of the property, will have responsibility ultimately for that unless or until a tenant is obtained in accordance with your historic preservation ordinance. We have an obligation to maintain that structure so that the term is called demolition by neglect. We cannot allow that to occur. It's the same as if we were to go and tear the building down. So we do have an obligation to maintain the integrity of that. Alliance, if you see any of their properties, they maintain a clean facility. So maintaining grass, maintaining landscaping around that facility is not going to be an issue between the township and Alliance. That will be well maintained.
And one last question. We had a project a few years back and I don't know how the sound fence actually works, but we had the same situation of what was coming in and the fence and the berm and landscaping around the residents behind it. And at that time, I thought it was a great idea. Some of the suggestion was the fence be closer to the parking lot, the berm behind it, and then the shrubbery on top of the berm and all that. And they take care of all the landscaping, not the homeowners. I'm not sure if that works where, hey, if I'm looking at my back window, I can see a berm with the landscaping and the sound barrier fence is on the other side. I don't know if it could work that way. I know we did that in a project where they had the fence closer to the properties and then the berm and everything. It's like, well, can we move the fence to the parking lot closer? Is there going to be any kind of shrubbery or anything in front of that fence?
Yeah.
Okay. Right.
And part of the goal here is to not just have one straight fence line that, you would see, and you can see it a little bit on the plan. It's to meander that fence along this buffering here, because there are a number of existing mature trees that will remain. And so we have to make sure to place the fence so that we don't destroy those trees. We were actually asked by one of the neighbors to remove, there's a dead tree that's going to fall on his house. We're going to take that one down. But the other mature vegetation that's there, we're going to keep. And so the goal really is to bring that fence, one, to keep it as high as we possibly can, right? Use the topography, get as much effective height as we can, but then utilize all of that buffering to put some on both sides of the fence. Because the buffering is really for our neighbors, it's not for us to look at.
Right.
So to the extent we can put buffering on their side, great. We also have that maintenance obligation, so we have to make sure we can get to it. But this is, we believe this is the best design we can do, utilizing our topography, the 8-foot height limit, and the very substantial landscaping that's proposed there.
Okay. Thank you. All yours, Joe.
First question, we said, you are going for preliminary.
That
Preliminary.
we did not. I do not believe that we had a request for preliminary
The
final.
paperwork we have to-
And I believe that requires a waiver, and I don't believe that we submitted a waiver request.
I have a similar situation in the other part of my ward. Where they put a warehouse in, backs up to townhouses, a developmental. And all these studies they did, the sound, all these stipulations or requirements that were asked for. What happens if they don't work? Because that's what happened on the other warehouse facility. I get complaints every day, the noise, the buffers ain't working. I mean, how do we address it after? Because the people in them houses, George could tell you, we get 3-4 calls a week. They're livid, nothing's, it's not working. I mean, once we let you do this and none of this works, where do we go?
I'll start with this. Your ordinance, your noise requirements are ongoing requirements. You have the ability to enforce that on an ongoing basis. They become zoning violations if our tenant does not comply. And
So I want a tenant that I got to hound and harass and stay
No,
on top of. and
I
get
hope
fines
not.
to keep 'em-
I certainly hope not.
Right.
It's certainly not Alliance's goal. Alliance is a long-term holder of properties. They don't want to be dealing with zoning violations. So they're well aware, really, when they're signing up tenants, that these tenants are subject to certain requirements in this district. Now, I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but our facility, in all likelihood, will not be the source of the problems for those neighbors. When 322 is completed and that is widened, the current plans are calling for a large PennDOT sound wall on the south side, which will really do nothing more than cause the vehicles on 322 to bounce their noise off of that wall, heading right back to these neighbors.
Here's the other issue. The building you say is 40 foot high.
Correct.
And the wall, that's the sound barrier per se, is what, 8 foot? But the building sits a little, what?
15 feet down, yeah.
Right.
So it's about a
But it's 40
23,
foot high. So how about all the units on top of the building that make all?
and that's what the sound
They're going
study,
to be above the sound wall.
and that's what the sound study analyzed, independent of the sound wall, that those will not exceed either the daytime or nighttime limits. Again, obviously a township has to at times enforce its rules if somebody is not compliant. We are certainly hopeful that we choose the correct tenant, that they will comply, but you do have that ongoing ability. If the noise level from those rooftop units is exceeding your ordinance requirements, you can enforce it. And that includes imposition of daily fines for those violations.
But I go back to, do we want a tenant that we have to harass? Do we have to, I don't want to find a business, you know what I mean?
Correct.
We're trying, I just think that if half this stuff doesn't work, what's our repercussion? I mean, other than going after the tenant all the time, we're stuck. The other complaint is the value.
And remember, as the property owner, those fines are levied against Alliance. They're not levied against the tenant. So that ends up having the owner of the property, who's not going anywhere, a stakeholder in that discussion and in that battle to make sure that their tenant complies, because the fines go to the property, not to the tenant.
I'm telling you, the complaints I get, it's 24 hours of noise. The noise never goes away. The trucks ain't coming in. The units on the roofs are making noise. Trucks come in, they get there before the place opens, they're idling, they keep running, the backup beepers. I mean, if these sound barriers and stuff don't work, it's a nightmare. How do you assure me that if they don't work, there's, I mean,
I can only say what I've said so far about your ability to continue to enforce. Again, we had expert in the industry prepare an
So did they.
analysis.
I mean, I'm not just trying to be sarcastic, but. And yeah, but that's 150 yards away, the other development, they're within 85 feet. It's just,
Okay, we're gonna open it up to the public comment real quick, and then we'll go to our solicitor and engineer if they have any questions. I have to open up to the citizens who are not able to attend the meeting. So they could phone in and dial 571-748-4021. That phone number again is 571-748-4021. And enter in 181-187-931 And that's 181-187-931 As you go to unmute your phone, dial star 6. After unmuting your phone, state your name and address and begin your comment. You will be given 2 minutes to speak, then be placed back on mute after your comment. We will open the phone lines open now for a few minutes here, and we'll wait for any comments on the phone, then we'll go to the public in the audience tonight. Make note, there was no public comment by phone. We'll be opening up comments on the floor tonight. We have no split room tonight. We'll go start with the first row, please. Anybody in the first row that wants to come up? Okay, back row. That's fine. Just state your name and address and telephone number if you want us to get back to you, please.
Maureen Wall, 5105 Martin, Marten Avenue. And it's 2 minutes, whatever it was. Joe, I want to say thank you. Those comments you had a lot to do with things that are concerned to us as the neighbors. If one of the things they didn't show you were the renderings that they showed last week to show what they think the building would look like. I happen to have pictures of the warehouse behind Applebee's from a backyard with a 15-foot drop below, and they don't have a solid wall, but they have a chain link fence. And gee, you still see most of the building, and it'll be the same height building, little bit smaller dimensions, but in winter coming up 452, you don't miss that building, even though it sits hundreds of feet back off 452. So it's a huge, monstrous building that will be sitting there, and who knows if it will ever really be used. I know the internet tells us there's a shortage of warehouse space, but as a result, there's been a boom in building warehouses every place they can sandwich anything in. Within Upper Thai, Aston, Logan Township, New Jersey, Woolwich Township, New Jersey, and East Greenwich, New Jersey, because those were the ones that came up from a simple Google search of warehouses near me. 5 million square feet have been either built and leased, or proposed and under construction within the last couple of years. And USA Today reported this week that Amazon has already decided to pause or stop construction on 40 of their planned warehouses. So if we're already seeing major tenants deciding we're not going to go ahead and build these warehouses, is this going to end up being a huge building that you will not be able to miss coming up Chichester Avenue? No matter what kind of landscaping's around it, you will see it. And then it even just sits there vacant. And they were not very good neighbors this summer as they let the grass grow until one of the neighbors on Summers, I believe, contacted you, Joe. And it did get cut in a few days, and I don't even know who cut it. I don't know whether the township did or you got a hold of them and they finally came in, but it had been pretty darn high. So they've already demonstrated they're not being really good neighbors. So I don't have confidence they will be going forward. There's one other thing, forget it right now. But you said we're going to be stuck with it when it's there and have to live with it. And it's not pretty.
Thank you. Anybody else in the rear? Yeah, we'll start there since we started in the back.
One of the questions I have is you stated that one road to the left and the back side of it was like emergency access. Because the township ordinance requires one way in, one way out to get out if there's a problem. How come that doesn't go to Larkin Road? I mean, to Chichester Avenue? Yeah, but that's. I get that part, but can't a fire truck circle around the building if there's two entrances coming off of Chichester Avenue coming in? And that way it gives you a better option. You stated to police that road for no truck traffic. And that gives you an option to do that. The plan the way it is now doesn't give you an option to do it. Does it? You close it off. What about if the entrance gets closed off? How do you get out? To create emergency access. Well, I just thought of it that way. That way you're controlling your traffic for those residents on Summers Lane to be impacted with trucks or whatever going through there because it's going to limit it. That's the only reason why I brought that up. Mm-hmm. That was really my only question was the access.
Thank you. Front row, please. Yeah, yeah, either or, just state your names.
Cindy Charney, 2552 Central Avenue.
Frank Sill, 4308 Trophy Drive.
Couple of points that I think need to be made regarding the historical structures. One is that the historical resource survey for what we call the Hanby Farm is more than just the house. It includes the barn and the outbuildings. So the demolition delay ordinance that we have, the historic preservation ordinance, applies to all of the buildings on the site. So with that in mind, the question has come up for us, when does the demolition permit have to be applied for? Because the plan currently requires demolition of all of the buildings except the house. But as far as we're aware, the demolition permit hasn't been submitted yet. So how do those relate to, the current application?
The only issue that I'm looking to the Board of Commissioners and or our solicitor to clarify is that I appreciate that part. But if the way I read the demolition delay ordinance, once you do apply for it, there could be an extensive amount of time and meetings that are called for if it's in that request. So I just wanted to know what the commissioners thought of that and what the timing of it. Because I believe with where we're at right now, with what you've presented as what you're able to do for our historic heritage, that it's falling short of what we were hoping and asking you to do. You had mentioned that you had a communique, I think the last one was on the 20th, that you responded to a communique from us, and we've responded to that, and we haven't heard back about it yet. The commissioners are all in possession of those documents, going back and forth between the two of us, and it was very amiable, but we didn't finish up on it. You may have finished up on it with your, thoughts on moving the building. But as far as we're concerned, and I'm speaking for the Historic Society, not myself personally, but the Historic Society is concerned, there's a lot of things not addressed yet. Things like the foundation, I heard you mention the word slab earlier, whether it's going to be a full foundation, and other things that would be normal if you truly intend to put a tenant in there, and I believe you do. But I also believe that the building could remain dormant for such a long period of time that the interest in that could wane. And I'm concerned with sending this building into the future. So when you do this, we have other things to discuss, the materials and type of foundation going in, but bringing in, at that point, when you're developing the site, bringing in sewer to that building and mechanicals, water and everything, and electric and communication underground. So we feel that there's more things that have to be discussed. And in regards to the demolition delay ordinance, with the barn too, I think we're going to go through a whole nother battery, a different type of battery of questioning and meetings that's called for in the demolition delay ordinance. And it has to do, with the actual demolition of the barn, and you're amiable to helping us with, claiming some of the materials, but we really don't want all the materials. I'm sure you understand, what would be beneficial to us would be cherry picked. And we had the hopes that you would help us, maybe put some type of structure up on the site that was built out of the barn materials, something that could be used by the township, even the building when it's renovated, something that could be used by the township possibly. And I would like to ask at this moment, if you have, when we're talking about all this, I'm just wondering if it's a lot of money to move the building. Do you have a budget that you could share with us? What you would be willing to spend to save our heritage? Is that a number you have in mind, or you haven't done?
Yeah, let me make another comment. We had talked earlier about the house, and to Frank's point, in historic preservation, there are two terms that are used when you're rehabbing or restoring a building, and one is restoration, one is rehabilitation. There's a big difference between those two. Restoration will restore the building to an era, of perhaps its construction, perhaps, the year 1900, but it restores it to what it would have looked like at that point in time. So using the same kinds of materials, et cetera. So when you talk about a rehab, that means that you put the building into use, but the materials may not be the same that were used in the original construction or during some earlier era that you're trying to, replicate. So there's a big difference. And obviously there's a cost associated with restoration that can be greater. So when you talk about a slab, that really is not restoration, that is rehabilitation. And so I think we need to distinguish what will actually occur with the house once these, the renovations are completed or underway at least. And one other thing, we have talked about the barn and what would happen to it. There was some earlier discussion about possibly using some of the architectural elements in the facade of the warehouse. And that would also go to what the Planning Commission's asking for, some improved aesthetics. So that's something for consideration. If the barn cannot be dismantled and rebuilt on a different location, we want to consider that. But none of the discussion that we had about the barn, I don't believe has been formalized in any respect. And I think we'd like to see that as well.
So Cindy, if the tenant has to apply for the permit for the demolition and it's a delayed demolition permit, that starts the process of the Historical Society to be able to meet with the tenant to iron these questions out. It doesn't sound like, and I'm not choosing sides anywhere, but it doesn't sound like that they were taking that step for the demolition permit at this time. But when it does come, it's our job as the township to make sure it's a delayed permit, that you guys have the opportunity to iron all this out with the tenant and the Historical Society. And if that's so be it, and it comes back to the Board of Commissioners, and then that part is approved, the permit's approved, and the process starts. Knowing all this, you're right, I was a little questioned about the slab myself when I heard it's being moved on a slab. So trust me, I heard that. So I'm just saying, but if we have a due process in that ordinance, it's good because that gives you guys all these questions and answers between the tenant and the Historical Society to iron out before we even issue the permit. So it hasn't gotten that far. They're already in a preliminary. Their next step, they want to try to get to the final, and then we could do it's going to be a due process for a while yet.
Yeah, and I do appreciate that, but my concern is that if this plan is approved, it bypasses the preservation ordinance, because by virtue of approving the plan, you're approving demolition of the barn and all the outbuildings.
No, not. That's a separate permit. It will not, if hypothetically, if we passed it and it's not even the final, so it's still got to come back to us again. That doesn't give him the opportunity to tear everything down right now. Now, if he proceeds to come to us and want the demolition permit, correct me if I'm right, that's the start process with you guys. And we're still in the process of the final. Everything could coincide towards the end.
And the buildings all stay until
Until the demolition permit is actually addressed.
I'd just like to emphasize, go ahead.
I just address. Me, Commissioner Baca met with the Alliance. One of the very first things we talked about was the Historical Society and the two structures that were on the property. And as Alliance stated tonight, they reached out to the Historical Society to see if they can work some type of compromise prior to going to a demolition, prior to applying for a demolition permit. And I think he stated tonight that he's been trying in good faith, try to working something out. So up until that point in time, that's why, and as Ed said tonight.
To just clarify what you just said.
Because we're not at that point yet.
Yes,
We're trying to
okay.
work it out.
There you go with the, okay,
Excuse
with,
me. Just 1 second. We have a person in the audience, so that only one person can speak at a time. Okay, so we can't have trying to talk over each.
so what am I doing wrong? What do you want me to? Oh, I'm letting him speak?
Let him speak.
Are you finished, Michael? The point is, you made your point, understand that, and excuse me for having one more, go at this. I just want to make sure the commissioners understand, and we did submit to the planning department the correspondence with Alliance, and I'll agree with you. They wanted to talk to us and we started talking, but there was no completion of anything. It was left rather with their unilateral decision on what they were going to do. And what our real desires have never been addressed. Evidently, maybe they're just saying no to their real desires. And our real desires is to have more than just the building moved and in its skeletal position. We would want to see way more than that. That's why I'd be curious of their budget and what we'd be willing to try to, like you say, compromise and make happen. And I'd just like to say, we're concerned with the distant future, what we will tell the future, with all these decisions about who we were and who came before us. There's a lot to this. And I just think the plan as it stands falls way short of what our town deserves. And after this, if Cindy doesn't have any more comments, that's all I have to say from a historic, representation. Then I'd like to be able to come back up to the mic as a citizen unrelated to the Historic Society.
Well, you could say that, Frank, if you got comment on the project as a resident? Yeah,
Be very brief. I appreciate the follow-up from the commissioners that this is early in the process. I'll reiterate, Alliance has tried to work through the township and with the Historic Commission from day one. I won't go through all of that history. We've tried to act in good faith by not applying already for demolition permits. I disagree with a lot of the comments, but the end result here is my client has agreed to invest an enormous amount of money. I will not share that budget at this point, an enormous amount of money to preserve this residence and keep it on site. So we continue to look forward to working with the Historic Society on what exactly that entails in terms of a future user, what amount of rehabilitation will go into the structure. But a fortune's already being spent to make sure that that is retained on site.
Having met with the house movers, I've learned about the process. It's not proposed to be put slab on grade. Just the process of moving the house, you need some sort of basement. So we were discussing a sort of a glorified crawl space, a 4 or 5 foot space below. If I could be convinced there'd be a use for a basement, perhaps we would go that route, but slab on grade is not practical. It wouldn't be practical for hooking up utilities and things like that and changes after the fact. So I don't think there's any disagreement. Now, as Historical Society would tell you, I've offered to meet everyone on site. That's never happened, but we remain willing to be cooperative and we're trying. I personally found the house less interesting than the barn. Our budget being what it is, say, hey, let's work together. Which one do you want? This and that. Let's try to fit something on the site. My team has prepared probably 4 months ago, a demolition permit for the site. And I've refused to submit that because I felt that it was rude to file that while we were talking. To learn that that is the trigger to have a meaningful discussion is very disappointing because we've been in good faith trying to have that. So, I mean, I'll file that tomorrow if that's helpful, but that feels like a slap in the face for us having offered several times to talk about it. I thought that we were very close to resolution.
well, yeah, Mr. Pierce.
Process. But there are limits to the like hard codes. Develops and it's fun. Bring that out to information. So I think that the proper process is being handled by the developer. In compensation. These could be memorialized. Sounds like I'm hearing this is what it is, then so be it, but I don't think that that impacts directly on this process for preliminary approval of that.
Right. Lisa, you have any comments? No. Right.
I would be doing stuff that. And not certified with those standards. Those, comment. I know it's not perfect, but there is enforcement. It was zoning laws. Be enforcing any violations of wilderness, air, dust, all of the various. Aware of what that process would be. Any kind of improvement. Later, right before, as we're talking about the resolution. The condition being that time in the public, then we can look at going to the record. And the intention that we have to back the process for this.
Okay. Thank you.
One just quick comment. My issues aren't with Alliance. You build beautiful buildings, use your top rate. My issues is where the building's going and what impact it's going to have on the residents. Like I said, I'm dealing with it in a similar situation. And there's been a lot of headaches and I just want to address them out front. I mean, if we were going to have all these same issues, I mean, it'll be a nightmare. That's all. I mean, you guys are professional, if this building was going in the middle of the industrial park, I'd be helping you push it as fast as we could. You know what I mean? It's just where it's going is my issues. That's all.
So where do we stand with, Mr. Pierce? Is there a time limit if they do the hypothetically, if the demolition permit goes through tomorrow, is there a time limit for the delay? Okay. Please tell it all. Okay. So we could get everything. Okay. Well, Mr. Lewis, thank you very much. I don't think there's any comments here with the Board of Commissioners. Everybody said everything. We will end this presentation on this and, yes. Well, that would be it for the presentation for Alliance. Thank you very much for coming out. You're more than welcome to stay. We're going to get right into our citizens' comments for the regular meeting. Oh, okay, yes. Going to open it back up to our regular caucus meeting. And any citizens' comments? We have any citizens' comments for the regular caucus meeting? Want to come up to the? Be here next week. Okay, we'll move along. We'll go to our professional report. We'll go to our engineer, Lisa Catania.
I'm assuming I probably should use this. Just a few things. You have a copy of my report. And I'm just going to go through quite a bit of our list for the agenda. The 2022 road program is substantially complete. With all of the work that we've done, we've only had one complaint. So Mr. Neary is working with our staff. Is working with the resident and our staff to get that resolved. I believe that there is going to be a meeting set up with the actual property owner, so that whatever letter that is going to be memorialized will be memorialized. I offered to go, prior to her work, which would be at 7 o'clock in the morning, to have that meeting, see how we can get that moved forward. I do have an invoice number one for AF Damon in the amount of $576,409.17. So that will be on the agenda. We do have a change order. However, we found today, when we thought we were getting the price, instead we got an email stating that the castings that we were planning on utilizing will not be here for 16 weeks. So I'm almost thinking that we might want to defer that till the spring of next year and do it as a separate project. We're looking at alternatives right now to see how we can do it. This is for a raised crosswalk at Washington. We have to get the water through the crosswalk. So we were planning on utilizing trench drain with opening it, through the actual drain itself. And unfortunately, with supply chain being what it is, we're hearing it's 16 weeks. So right. So right now, they haven't done any of the painting yet for the crosswalk itself. The ramps, we're waiting on a final from PennDOT. So the mill in Chichester Avenue should be coming up soon. We should have that probably in the next week or so. And then the other, we were going to do the raised ramp in lieu of some of the other ADA ramps. We continue with those ADA ramps as we were talking originally, but we were planning on doing the raised crosswalk that will give us traffic calming as well as an ADA ramp across Washington Avenue at a better place than where people are crossing right now to get to that ADA ramp. It actually would be in front of the church. So we're not at the driveway, the parking lot of the church, and we're not at the intersection. So we were hoping to have that completed. It doesn't make sense to put the ramp in and then have water sitting on the upstream side of it because we can't get the water out. So the Chichester Avenue Streetscape project, the only thing that's left in that project, and we will have a PennDOT permit, is the easements. And we are required to get easements we tried to get PennDOT to allow us to do right of entry, since it's merely we're putting new sidewalks in and we have grass that will be on people's property that we're going to have to restore. They would not agree to that. So we have the easements out to the residents. We have had them out for about a month and a half now, and we've started contacting each one individually. So we're in process of getting those to PennDOT. We'll be able to start that project. The stormwater project, the one that I wanted to talk about because I believe that we have all of the easements. I'm not sure, checking on the recording of those easements, but we have all the easements for Peach, Plum, and Cherry Street project. If you recall, we held from doing a bid authorization until such time as we had the easements, so we weren't running into a situation as we had at Ryan's Run. I don't know from a finance standpoint or budget standpoint whether or not something that you want to pursue this year bidding to start next year, but I am putting that on the table, that project is ready should you want to move forward with that. Speaking of other stormwater projects, we did receive bids for the Terrace Circle Basin bid. That bid was, we had 4 contractors who sent proposals or sent bids. The low bid was that of Scavecchio. They are from the township. I've asked them for references. I've not utilized them before. I've not seen them in any of my municipalities, other municipalities. So I'd like to get references from them so that we can verify that he is capable of doing the work. Quite frankly, he left over $50,000 from the next bid. And then the other bids were, the other, next two bids were extremely close to each other. So he's below what we were estimating the project to be. I just want to make sure that he's capable of doing that job. Because again, I am not aware of this. The stormwater ordinance. So the stormwater ordinance, there's been some discussions. We have increased the trigger point for impervious coverage versus it being 500, it would be 1,000 to try to allow people to do smaller projects. I don't know if anyone has any other comments from that. We discussed that earlier. Heard anything, so.
My only concern with that is, I said it to George, anybody that did a project this year was required to do the 500, I mean, but I think we need to raise it to 1,000. But I'm like, will we have to reimburse them? Okay. Okay.
So my concern is if you reduce it to 1,000, or if you increase it to 1,000 feet, and somebody comes in and puts in 900 square foot bunk. Okay. All that's, and they have elevations. All that stormwater is no longer accounted for, correct? I mean, how do they? That's what I meant.
Yeah, I'm not, what do you mean by accounted?
Well,
So,
in if right now, if somebody wants to put in something that's 501 square feet, they have to account for the stormwater amount
That's correct.
that's being dispersed somewhere else. If we raise it to 1,000, somebody could put in a pool, a small condo, I don't, whatever. I'm not a builder,
that's okay.
but
I just want them to know.
they no longer have to account for that, correct?
They do not. They do not.
Up to
So,
1,000. They don't.
up
after
to
1,000,
1,000.
they
Now I will tell you that there is a section in the ordinance, and currently in your ordinance, but there's a section of the ordinance that you can't do 900 square feet this year and another 500 next year, and breaking the projects up. You will then have to do not only that second year, what was required for the second project and what was required for the first. And that's for a 5-year period. So it's really up to the board. My initial and the template that came from the county had a 500, which is what your current is. In the discussions, we raised that so that it would give some of the residents some leeway from having to do stormwater for smaller projects.
I'm good with 1,000. I've been fighting.
I don't think any numbers were really discussed. I know 1,000 square feet would be roughly like a little shy of 32 by 32 foot addition if somebody wanted to put it on. 750 would be 27 feet by 27 feet, just to give some type of gauge of what size structure somebody could put on. So.
So.
My question would be is to that is if you exempt them, right? So exempt them from putting, so The stormwater ordinance is in place because the concept idea going forward is that each individual property handles all of their stormwater on that property, right? So what we found was that the 500, it's been communicated to us is very restrictive, and garages, pools, patios, additions on homes, right? There's an additional cost now associated with doing that to comply, right? I guess what was brought up earlier with the 1,000 is that, so someone does a 1,000 footprint home on a vacant lot currently, right? So, 2,000 square foot home, 1,000, square foot footprint. If you exempt that, you're not obligating them to retain that stormwater on their property, nor are you requiring them to go through any type of review or anything related to that. So they effectively, I understand what you're saying, that that there are some things in maybe the code that we could try to finagle, but effectively the board would be allowing something to be built in that case, with exempting it from needing to go through any kind of review of whether or not the stormwater will cause an issue, right?
So I think my recommendation would be, if you are looking at increasing that maximum, that we take a look at the grading ordinance. Your grading ordinance doesn't speak to that. We could actually trigger at least a grading plan that would provide enough information, because a building plan is not going to have grading on it. It's going to show the building itself and how that building is built. If we put a grading permit, and I have a pretty good grading ordinance that one of my municipalities had, and I think it's a very good one. There are some exemptions in it for some athletic activities, or like volleyball courts or things like that. But if you would have to still show that you are not impacting anyone, even though there may be additional waters.
And then in some of the ordinances also rate a percentage of the impervious on the property too. So, I mean, you're gonna have to go to, if it's too big, you're gonna have to go to zoning or whatever to ask for the relief. I mean, the zoning could actually make it more of a restriction.
Zoning only talks to the amount of impervious or building coverage on a lot. It doesn't speak to stormwater at all. So,
Yeah, but if you have an empty lot of 5,000 square feet in the building, 1,000 square foot home, or 999, they're gonna know is
yeah,
the footprint and the percentage of that property.
but I do have that ordinance, so if anyone's interested, I can forward that over. So you can see that there's an actual grading permit application, which is pretty similar to what Upper Chai is utilizing. So I think that could resolve some of the issue with impacting the adjoining property owners. They wouldn't be able to put swales in to concentrate flows onto someone else's property. They would have to have some mitigation as far as if there is water that's going on the property, you may have to do some sort of a berm or something. And I shouldn't say berm because that's not the right term, but a level spreader, so that you aren't getting concentrated flows on people's.
So what square footage would you trigger that? Because part of the whole reason that we wanted to look at this was because there's a significant amount of added costs right now for a relatively small improvement on the property due to the nature of the stormwater ordinance. So that was the communication that's been coming back from the board. So I guess, like, where would you put this in place? Because effectively this would be, again, you would need some type of plan that outlines effectively grades, right? And what you're going to be doing, and what level of like construction. So someone's doing a garage, would this be required, or only if it met a certain?
Well, the reality is, if they're doing a garage, they most likely would be doing a driveway, and they wouldn't be exempt to begin with, right? I would probably, I think the ordinance, and I'm going back because I haven't utilized it in about 5 years. I've not have another one of my engineers in that municipality, but I believe it's 1,200 square feet is what triggers
Can we, I didn't
We
mean,
can trigger it wherever we want to trigger.
I just have one more question. Would it make more sense as well to look at the gaps, right? So you have exempt, simplified, and full, right? So does it make more sense to look at the three of them, not independently looking at it and just saying we need to exempt up to this, but like, so if you're saying if someone puts a garage and they're putting a driveway in as well, which is going to, in a lot of circumstances, which is going to throw them over, the 1,000 square foot, right? Or could put them over 2,000. Is it worth looking at those three ranges and coming up with an amicable, this range is this range is this range is this?
Could be done.
that's the, I'm sorry. That's the point that I want to touch on that George just mentioned is that I think we as a board need to agree on what's exempt, what's going to trigger the modified stormwater ordinance, and what's going to trigger the full stormwater. And also I think we need for earth disturbance, that they're just disturbing in a open field. How much square footage can that be? Well, we're going to advertise. I just think these are details we need to work out before it gets voted on.
The other part of this that I want the board to understand is that each year when we're updating the MS4 permit and updating the plan to DEP, we've got to look at any BMPs that get put in. So that gives us credits, mainly for the impervious coverage that triggered that BMP. But as well, we've got to look at other impervious surfaces that are exempt. So, as we move forward, we don't want to get too far out that we're looking at, let's say, 5,000 square feet or even 3,000 square feet, because they start adding up. The township is then going to be responsible to create a BMP to maintain that, to reduce that TSS. I don't know if we need to discuss. I do not have the resolution because it was very late when we got the information about the noise. I've got to discuss some of the comments from Mr. Lewis concerning the planning commission's review, because typically we'll say the comments of the planning commission. Got to make sure that those comments are actually enforceable. So that's something that I've got to talk to Mr. Pierce about. We received a change order for Creekside to do a swale design, and I contacted George. Quite frankly, I think it's an exorbitant amount of money to redo the berm and the swale. My suggestion is that we remove the berm there altogether. The residents that are in that Creekside townhouse development really want that berm gone. It's been a real problem, and quite frankly, I think we have the ability to say to the HOA, if there is an issue with that berm was put there because someone from the HOA board was afraid that there was going to be privacy issues with the existing homes. So they have the ability to put whatever trees or landscaping to have that happen without us having to spend $25,000. There will be a fee for it. Mr. Costa never did the grading from the building patios out. So water is coming down and it's just laying in front of two of the downstream homes. And it's being trapped because of the berm. So versus us doing what the design engineer from Mr. Costa had suggested be done, I'm going to suggest that we just get a price to take that down, positive grade away from the residents, And there's quite a bit of elevation difference there that we can make that work.
Did we already do work there? I mean,
They did, they removed the stone, et cetera.
so if they take away the berm, can they use that soil to
They should be able
go
to.
from the
to
patio
pull
back?
that soil back and then take whatever's in that berm is nothing but snow. Yeah, so they did bring topsoil in, so they'd be able to utilize some of that topsoil.
Else to be brought to the attention of the engineer. Good, Lisa? Everything good? You got everything? I saw you, Michael wasn't sure. Go back to the solicitor's report, Michael Pierce.
Thank you. You do have a copy of my written report, just a couple of different highlights. We continue to work in conjunction with special counsel for the County Board of Health. My understanding is they were to have final arguments and submissions this afternoon before Judge Angelos. I have not received any additional information about a ruling at that point. But we'll obviously keep the board posted as to where we are. The second matter is we finally did have the hearing for Mr. Warner. It was held before Judge Durham on July 19th. Mr. Warner had sought another continuance, which was denied by the judge with our objections to his request for further continuance. And the matter was concluded before the judge. I wanted to point out that Keith Crowley and Bill Gavin did an excellent job in preparing the case for trial, and we're awaiting the judge's decision currently. We went enough, I think, over the whole issue with Alliance and the Planning Commission meetings. I think we've established everything that we have. I have reviewed and provided comments for the proposed volunteer firefighter incentives. Would anticipate the matter is in a position to be approved by the board at the regular meeting this month. The fire company would be the one certifying the eligibility for any of these incentives, and the township would exercise control over those funds by dispersing those funds. I did indicate that any amounts over $600 would be subject to a 1099 being issued by the township. Other than that, those were my major comments related to that, but I think that we're in a position to move forward. I have been in contact with the attorney for Somerset Homeowners Association. He has provided me what amounts to a construction maintenance agreement to be signed by the homeowners. I want to add some additional language that the township is not responsible for the design of the project. There will be no further involvement in this issue upon completion of the proposed project, and that will be on the homeowners association going forward. I know that that's what the board's desires were at that point, because there was some significant disagreement about whether this was going to actually solve all of the issues that were present at the HOA, but I think it's a substantial step in getting this rectified. I just want an acknowledgement by the individual property owners that this was designed and provided by the HOA and their engineer as a solution to what their problems were. I've been asked to update our policies and procedures regarding remote participation in light of the new law passed by the Commonwealth. That law is now in effect, and I'll make sure that we have at least a resolution for remote participation in meetings. The stormwater ordinance, I think we've already addressed at least what those issues are. We would be asking for authorization to go ahead and advertise for approval at the September meeting, whatever shape that ordinance is at the time. I've been asked to review our fireworks ordinance to comply with the recently enacted legislation by the Commonwealth. I want to take a look at that and see exactly where we are related to that. But other than that, I think everything else is in order. I don't have anything else to report.
Anybody have anything to be brought to the attention of the
Just a
solicitor?
quick question.
Yep.
1661 Mill Road, intermunicipal liquor license transfer.
Oh, I'm sorry. I did. Oh, yes. Sorry. I did forget about that. We've been asked to establish a public hearing for a liquor license transfer from another municipality into Upper Chichester. We went through this a couple of months ago with the Wawa, same type of thing. we would have a public hearing, so we'll need authorization to advertise for the public hearing so that any comments or questions can be concerned with that.
It's going to 1661 Mill Road?
I don't recall that right off the top of my head.
So I'm
I don't-
trying
That's Phoenix Ballroom.
It's Reliance, yeah.
Reliance.
Oh, okay.
Yes, yeah,
It's Phoenix Ball.
Trying to think
yeah.
where-
No, it's the one for Reliance, coming from another municipality, yes. Sorry, I apologize, I forgot about that.
So next week, we authorized the advertisement of that, and then we have the hearing in September.
That's correct. I have to get the approval from the applicant because technically the date would be September 3rd, which is before our September meeting. But I just want to get an extension for that, and I will communicate with the applicant for that.
Thought that might be your house or something. Eh? That's what you meant me.
The Commissioner's going to run a speakeasy out of it.
We're gonna get out. Yeah. Managers report. Yeah, this is true.
Good evening, everybody. So quite a few items here, so I'll try to go through them relatively quickly. Last month, I gave you a proposal from Millennium Strategies for grant consulting services. This is a company out of New Jersey who works on a retainer basis to acquire grants for municipalities, counties, school districts. One of their main clients since 2010 in Pennsylvania is Township of Middletown. I actually know the manager there, Stephanie Tioli Cools, very well. So I reached out to her to speak about, what is the value that they provide. And she indicated that, for the cost, that there's a significant value. They work with the township professionals. They work with the township department heads to seek out and apply for grants that sometimes are a little less engineering heavy. So it kind of gets us a broader range of grant writing. So it would be like in conjunction, working with everybody that's already gives us another tool in our tool belt. The second item I have is was touched on a little earlier this morning about stormwater management and the MS4 program and all these things. So I think back in 2012, I attended a First Class Township Commissioners Conference where one of the topics was the upcoming need for stormwater utility implementations. And I think that when you look at the backlog of potential projects that we have and things that we want to accomplish in different areas of the town, it makes sense for us to start to explore the possibility of transitioning from utilizing tax dollars and kind of piecemealing things together to a organized, entity that is responsible for this, including raising revenues as well as managing the plans for that. So I have solicited a proposal for a stormwater utility implementation from HRG. Again, this has come through recommendations from other municipalities. I'm also good friends with the manager of Norristown Borough, and they recently went through this process. And in conversations with him, the process that he described through HRG is very similar to what conversations we've had over the past couple of years as to what it might look like in transitioning to a stormwater authority. So
George, they won't be our authority. They're just helping us create an authority.
yeah, they do the whole setup part of the process, like the 5-year implementation plan that would be the authority's responsibility to maintain. The authority would have similar responsibilities as the sewer authority. They would be able to appoint their own counsel. They'd have to appoint their own engineer. HRG would be simply helping them set up a rate structure, determining what kind of staffing they would need, what they would need to manage the current infrastructure that exists and the future needed infrastructure.
And they could show us how to combine it with the sewer authority, right?
Yes. Yep. Sorry, that's a lengthy proposal. So the next item was a request that came through the emergency management coordinator. So the Township Emergency Management Committee has been meeting pretty regularly on the, on various items, including updating their emergency management plan. And we've had conversations with them over the past couple of years as to maybe like, finding out where the gaps are and how they can be assisted in completing what some of their goals are. So they went out and solicited a proposal for services to help update the Township Emergency Management Plan from CCERT Safety. And CCERT Safety has worked with local municipalities. They've worked with Marcus Oak, Lower Chichester, I believe in Trainer to help develop their emergency management plan. I think that this is a good idea. The proposed number is slightly above what we have budgeted, but this would be most likely be a project that starts later in this year and transitions to next year. So from a monetary perspective, I don't see anything wrong with this. I think this is a something that is needed and makes a lot of sense. I was brought up a couple months ago to explore redistricting again. And there was was put onto a company called Flow Analytics, which is a GIS company that just so happens to have found a niche in doing this. A niche. They are all across the country. They do work. One of their big projects right now that they've been on for quite some time and indicated that they'll continue to be on for quite some time is reallocating the different schools in the school district of Philadelphia to the different different pockets of, kids live here, they go to this school. So but anyway, they provided a proposal of what their scope of work would be through going through a very open process with the public meetings, presenting potential options. And as you know, part of what was communicated in the first time this was brought up this time is that there is no longer a dividing line throughout the municipality. So there may be a better, easier way to get this done than what has happened in the past, where it's kind of been derailed through that. So I'd ask you to look through that and give comments as well, please.
Is this the same company that Mr. Neary?
Yes. Yep. And then budget meetings, typically we advertise the budget meetings monthly. So we can continue to do that and we can continue to set them monthly, or I was thinking if we all had our calendars and we're able to just kind of hone in, maybe we could do it all at once. We're proposing it be the last Monday of the month. However, I know there's a conflict in September, I believe it is. So September, we'd move to the 19th. So we'd be looking to hold these on Monday evenings at 7 p.m. in this room, August 22nd, September 19th, and October 24th. That October 24th takes us up to the kind of the last revisions of the budget before we get to the adoption of the preliminary budget at the November caucus meeting. So if that works for everybody, I'll go ahead and get that on the agenda as a motion to advertise.
I'm good.
Zoning map amendment. So we've been going through, a couple of months ago, I was authorized to prepare and advertise an ordinance with some zoning map amendments. I met with various commissioners. We talked about different potential zoning map changes and kind of a process forward. And working with the township planner, we came up with a low-hanging fruit, things that were kind of sitting out there for quite some time that needed to get cleaned up. Then there's some other iterations after that, which were a little bit more complex. And I sent you guys out an email about that, where I spoke about the kind of the process where we'll be picking these off based off of the specific areas. So for instance, we passed the 322 plan previously. We'd like to do look at the 322 corridor as what is the applicable zoning changes that should happen along the 322 corridor. The Boothwyn Town Center, Ed and myself and Brian Siddell will be meeting tomorrow morning to get the ball rolling on that one. We've talked about Linwood Heights. We've talked about Twin Oaks Village. We'll be doing a planning session for Boothwyn Heights in the fall, so we'll be going to there. So we're trying to get through all of the different planning neighborhoods. This, however, just affects a couple of properties where we found some significant issues on with potential upcoming uses. One of them being the Kingsman Park has been zoned as industrial. And as we know, the library is attempting to put together plans to build a library there. So the planner was asked to look for a zoning that was most compatible to allow for something like that to happen, as if they were trying to comply with the zoning. You have non-conforming property, non-conforming use, lots of different things that may cause them to have to go through additional steps. So Mr. Pierce has the ordinance and the everything for review. Once I get the go-ahead with that, I'll get that advertised. We've already sent it to the Delaware County Planning Commission. It's already been sent to our Planning Commission. We are on pace to have that hearing at the September meeting and adopt the ordinance that night. We have a request for a temporary handicap parking space that came from the police department in the vicinity of 509 Taylor Avenue. This was reviewed by the police department and verified, and they have no objection with the request. Annually, the Pennsylvania State Association of First Class Township Commissioners and the Pennsylvania Municipal League now will be having their meeting. And since we are members to both, we need to appoint our delegates. So is anybody able to go to the conference in October? October in Pittsburgh. Well, here's what I'll say. If you can get back to me over the course of the next week, if you'll be able to attend, and we can figure out who we can put on as our delegates. At this time, I believe I'm out of town the week after that, so I have to check my calendar to see if that's something I could get to. Yeah. Well, the conference is the 7th and 8th. Yeah. So we'll have that. As you know, we were awarded the Green Light Go Award for 452 I-95. There is another component that we have to do, just passing a resolution stating that myself and Commissioner Rakowski are the signatories for that. It went into the online portal, and they are requiring an upload of a resolution. Do the resolution at the meeting, we put it there, and then we'll have to sign. There was an announcement of this traffic signal technologies grant, the TSTG. It's not a lot of money in the grant pool. I believe it's $5 million for the entire grant pool. But what they're funding is I always call these the wrong thing, Lisa. What is it? Like signal coordination technology. Yes, synchronization to be put into the traffic signals. So as you know, this was built into our traffic signal ordinance as a requirement for anyone who puts in a new signal. So PennDOT, when they do the 322 project, will be complying with this, and we'll have an adaptive, technology. And they're putting one also, it would go down on Market Street as well. So we thought maybe this might be a good grant to look at doing something along Chichester Avenue to assist in helping the traffic flow through Chichester Avenue. So it'd be a technology where all of the traffic signals are talking to each other up and down to assist in moving traffic through the corridor. Well, it's like, because they didn't do the whole intersection. Yeah, it's just on the timer. So this would be looking at the technologies that could help that function slightly better.
Yeah, it'll go from all the way up to Larkin Road. Got like 4 lights in that
Yeah.
area. But I'm just saying the technology wasn't put there when they did the internet. No.
And then the only other thing I have, and I apologize it's so long tonight, we have a request for a refund from the tax collector for an error, and that's in your packet. That's all I have.
Anything to be brought to the attention of the manager? That's two contracts. George, on that proposal for your grant, I read the other one. that you gave us last week or whatever. I had July, I guess. The cost is pretty, are we not guaranteed, but are they that much of a go-getter to really go for these grants if we're spending so much money a month, but it's almost 40,000 for the year?
I mean, so what they described the process would be is what they really need is some tool from us to be able to assist them, right? So that tool is what we're working on with our capital improvement plan. So the idea would be that we're giving them this 5-year capital improvement plan and access to our staff and our professionals to work together. And they would seek out any and all grants associated with potentially being able to fund those items in there. For $40,000, if they land one grant, I mean, it pays for itself, right? So really, I mean, if let's just say we require them to apply for 12 grants, with an average of, $500,000 awards, and they get one grant for 40,000. They pay it to themselves. So I think, I think it's because the cost is not exorbitant, and we know the return on the grants can be pretty significant. I think it's worth looking into having that support, especially because I do know, like, a neighboring municipality, Aston Township and Media Borough, seem to get quite a significant amount of grants. They both use grant writing services.
Anything else for the manager? Now we'll move along to our commissioners. Madam Vice President Nicole Whitaker. When is your crab feast? Harvest. Good. $60. $60 a person. Where's it going? Oh, okay. Oh, all right. Anything to be brought to the attention of Commissioner Whitaker? Now we'll go to Commissioner Joe Neary.
Thank you. The financials are not available right at the moment, but will be, as well as the police report. I'd like you to carefully look at the incentive program. The 3 things were added at the bottom. The fact that we were, as Mike, as a solicitor, mentioned about the 1099s, et cetera. The other thing is, I guess there were the trash refunds, and I think there's one this month. That's all I have.
Anything to be brought to the attention of Commissioner Neary? Commissioner Mike Cordier.
Thank you, Commissioner Orkowski. I'll try to be as brief as possible. We have 4 extension coming up next week. One is for 659 Conchester Highway, it's land development for McDonald's. The second is 900 Township Line Road, the land development for the Fazana property. The third is 3033 Market Street subdivision land development. That's with Alliance. And the fourth one is 801 Bethel Road. It's a land development with John Mullen. 650 Cherry Tree Road subdivision and land development. We're still waiting for updated plans. We haven't received any of them yet. And then big topic tonight was 4800 Chichester Avenue land development. I just want to make sure that the resolution that will be prepared next week has final on it and not preliminary final. Last, excuse me, correct, is preliminary. Yes, preliminary and not preliminary final. So I just want to make sure we have that corrected. L and I, our two new hires are adapting very well. Bill and Amy are doing great work for us. And just also like the board to know that Mr. Gavin is scheduled to take his BCO test. I believe it's next month, but I will confirm that date if anybody would like to know. I don't have anything else. If anybody has questions for me, I'd be happy to answer them. If not, we can move on.
I just want to make a comment underneath yours on Bill Gavin and Keith and everybody. I know my phone's been ringing off the hook. I just want to put it on record. We are on top of our agenda. It's driving me nuts. I'm the most fairest guy up here. I don't think if anybody don't believe it, I'm sorry. We've been working with this property since spring because we had the same issue last year. And we're to the point now, as Mr. Lewis said, violations go through the internet. Guess what? We're done. We shouldn't have to work this hard. And my phone's been ringing off the hook the last 2 weeks. And they have been doing their job. They have been sending us sites. Like I said, when I started here in 2012, politics is slow. It's either reverse or stop. And so when you got that due process, we get the phone calls because they're doing a job. Doesn't look like this. It is being addressed and hopefully soon. Or Mr. Pierce, it's all yours. So we're going to move along to Commissioner Bianco.
Thank you. We're going to start the Teamster contract negotiations next week. And then we're kind of putting that in front of the trash route study, finalizing that because we need to make some changes with the highways contract to make some of that work. But we're going to work them together. I don't anticipate any big issues with the highway department. I think that they're going to go along with all the changes. I attended the sewer authority meeting and most of the discussion there was the new line going in from Beach Street down and tie through Lower Chi and tie into what's called the Marcus Hook interceptor line or force main, not interceptor. Lower Chi would like to meet with us and discuss some of the things in order not to hold the project up. So we're going to try to set a meeting up with them. If George can get that done, I'd appreciate it. And I think two of us can go, no more than that, right? So I'd like somebody to attend with me. You can decide who it is.
If I can't make it, Nicole.
Okay, I'm fine with either one, you know what I mean? And that's all I have right now.
Anything to be brought to the attention, Mr. Bianco?
Just one last thing. I'd like send my condolences to Jim Hutt. He lost his brother and a good friend, next door neighbor, all this week.
I think we all feel that way.
Yeah.
I mean, too young.
Yep, both of them.
We'll
That's
move
all I
along-
have.
Move along to my report, quick, short and sweet, shorter than George's anyway. The emergency management report is in your folder. The other two should be here next week. I would like to move along with the emergency management contract that they have with that person. As George stated, there's enough in the budget to start it for this year and extend it to next year's budget because it's by the hour and being able to look at the old book that we did have and implement some other things. And I do know this gentleman also did Delaware County for the county. So he's a very good guy and there's a possibility of getting some tabletop training off of this gentleman also. And I want to thank Mr. Neary and Art Gorga and, Mr. Pierce on trying all this on. Excuse me, and Butchie, my fault. I do not want to miss Butch, trust me. But I think it's long overdue with this incentive program for the volunteer firemen. Unfortunately, it's still not getting any better on getting volunteers, and they've been running. It's busier than busy, medic units, volunteer firemen. Every little bit helps. Like, I'm hoping we could pass this next week and get it to them for 2021. And it's up to the fire department to get us the number and the names. Thank you for this. Anything else for anybody? No, we'll have a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Out of here. Good night.